Most people believe that seeing too much is an advantage, that perceiving what others do not is a gift, a superior intelligence, a silent blessing. But Carl Jung, in his decades immersed in the deepest layers of the human psyche, understood something almost no one wants to accept. Those who see beyond appearances are not rewarded with clarity. They are condemned to a loneliness that has no translation, because seeing what others ignore is not a privilege. It is a burden that no one around you can help you carry. And Machiavelli, centuries earlier, had described the exact same phenomenon with a coldness that still disturbs us today. Those who observe human nature as it truly is can never again pretend they haven't seen it. You notice the pauses before the lies. You notice the smile that doesn't reach the eyes. You notice when a compliment hides envy, when concern masks control, when affection has a schedule. You notice that people say one thing with their mouths and something completely different with their bodies. And while the world around you continues to function within its comfortable illusions, you exist in a strange place, where real communication happens in the silences, in the micro-movements, in the contradictions that no one else notices. This is not paranoia. It is not an excess of sensitivity. It is heightened awareness. And Jung explained why this awareness hurts so much, because the common human mind needs illusion to function. When you start to see through it, you do not become smarter. You become unbearably alone. Think of an apparently ordinary dinner. The family gathered, the table set, the conversations flowing on a polite surface. While everyone eats peacefully, you register, unintentionally, the father who interrupts the mother for the third time without realizing it. The sister who pulls her son by the arm a little harder than the situation requires. The brother-in-law who laughs at a joke but whose eyes remain tense. The silence of an aunt when a certain name is mentioned. No one else notices. Everyone keeps chewing. But you have just watched in 3 minutes an entire film of unspoken conflicts that have been dragging on for decades. And when someone asks why you are quiet, you make up that you are tired. Because explaining what you have just seen would be asking for that whole table to collapse. So you swallow it, and you take that reading inside you. And it is this systematic swallowing, year after year, that slowly forms what Jung would call the observer's burden. The classic mistake is to believe that this lucidity is a flaw, that you need to be less intense, not read too much into things, trust people more. Modern culture venerates naivety and calls it optimism. It punishes perception and calls it negativity. But Jung never believed in this theater. To him, most people spend their entire lives sleeping with their eyes open, protected by a psychological fog that prevents reality from hurting too much. Whoever sees through this fog is not abnormal. They are just someone in whom the collective defense mechanism has failed. And this failure, however painful it may be, is the first symptom of something rare, a soul beginning to wake up. That is where the second layer comes in, the one almost no one has the courage to look at. Jung used to say that every human being builds, since childhood, a psychological mask he called the persona. The persona is what you show the world to be accepted, hired, loved, tolerated. It is not conscious deceit, it is survival engineering. You learned, while still small, that certain parts of you generated praise and others generated rejection. So you kept the rejected ones in an internal basement and began to exhibit only the approved ones. The child who laughed too loudly learned to be more restrained. The one who asked too many questions learned to stay quiet. The one who felt too much learned to perform balance. And over time, this performance became so automatic that you yourself forgot you were acting. The problem is that a highly perceptive person does not only see their own mask, they see the masks of everyone around them, and they see when those masks slip. They see the exact moment a manager performs concern while calculating layoffs. They see the relative who smiles at dinner and scorns behind their back. They see the friend who celebrates their victory with a hint of bitterness at the corner of their voice. It is not malice on your part to see this. It is simply that the masks of others were never made for people with X-ray vision. They were made for other masks. And here appears the antithesis that Jung would whisper in his office with the calm of someone delivering a definitive diagnosis. It is not that people lie to you. It is that they lie to themselves first, and then offer you an edited version of that lie as if it were their truth. You are not being deceived. You are being protected from the emotional fragility they cannot sustain on their own. And that is the exhaustion that almost no one can explain. That feeling of returning from a family dinner, a work meeting, or a gathering of friends, and feeling that you are carrying 10 extra pounds in your soul. This is not introversion. This is not social fatigue. It is the exhaustion of performing a diplomatic version of yourself while processing, at the same time, all the masks that fell before you. You were not just participating in the conversation. You were reading 3 layers of it in silence, and that reading has a cost. All perception has a cost. And that is exactly why so many people with this sensitivity end up falling ill in environments where no one else seems to. They are not living in the same environment as the others. They are living in its subtext. That is why I prepared the Código do Despertar for you. If this exhaustion from perceiving too much has followed you for years, if you have come to doubt your own sanity for seeing what no one else wants to see, this material is not motivational. It is not cheap illusion. It is an internal map based on the psychology of Carl Jung, divided into 60 days of daily lessons, with keys, questions, and declarations that lead you from silent restlessness to clear direction. It is not about stopping the perception. It is about stopping being destroyed by what you perceive. Access is in the first pinned comment below this video. If you recognize this pain, write "I see" in the comments, not as a slogan, as a mark of the moment you decided to stop pretending you didn't see. Jung called individuation the process by which a person stops being a reflection of collective expectations and begins to become what they truly are. It sounds beautiful when said like that, in a diluted self-help book. But in practice, individuation is one of the most brutal journeys a human being can undergo, because it demands that you dismantle, one by one, the layers of the mask you have spent your whole life building. And with every layer you remove, someone around you complains. Someone misses the previous version. Someone accuses you of having changed. Someone tries to call you back to the old character, because that is where that person learned to fit you in. The path of individuation, therefore, is not solitary because you are cold or arrogant. It is solitary because most people fell in love with your character, not with you. When you abandon the character, the audience disperses. And this is not a moral tragedy, it is a structural cleanup. Jung understood that a good portion of our relationships is not based on love. It is based on unconscious psychological contracts. I offer you the version of me that accommodates you, and you offer me the version of you that accommodates me, and both of us protect ourselves from each other's truth. The day you break the contract, the other feels as if you had betrayed something sacred. You did not. You simply stopped sacrificing your soul to keep the other person's mask intact. And here, the loneliness of waking up reveals its true anatomy. It is not the loneliness of one who has been abandoned. It is the loneliness of one who refuses to go on lying out of politeness. You sit at the same table with the same people as always, but you realize you can no longer laugh at the same shallow jokes. You try to take an interest in the conversations that once filled your week and feel a subtle repulsion, almost imperceptible, yet irreversible. It is not that these people have gotten worse. It is that you have ceased to be useful as a mirror for their alienation. And deep down, that is what they find most strange about you. Not your change, but the fact that your presence now forces each of them to remember what they are avoiding facing. And there is an even more uncomfortable detail in this phase. You start to realize that many people around you do not want you to improve. Not consciously, of course. Nobody wakes up in the morning formulating the thought of sabotaging those they love. But there is a silent psychological mechanism that Jung identified with precision. Every evolution of yours forces the other to face their own stagnation. When you start setting boundaries, those who benefited from your lack of them react. When you start speaking your mind, those who grew accustomed to your silence take offense. When you start choosing yourself, those who had you as a resource available 24 hours a day feel abandoned, and, in an almost invisible movement, they try to pull you back to the old place. Not with violence, with guilt, with phrases like, "You've changed," "You're acting strange," "You're different," said in a tone that feigns concern but carries deep down a request, "Go back to being the one who served me better." Recognizing this dynamic is painful, but liberating, because those who truly love you celebrate your growth even if they lose access to your old version. The cruel part of this process is that no one warns you. No one tells you when individuation begins that you will lose people you loved, that there will be nights when your bed will seem larger and emptier than the room itself, that you will look at your past with a mixture of gratitude and disgust, because now you see clearly how high a price you paid to belong to places that were never yours. Jung said that individuation is the only path to a true life, but he never promised it would be comfortable. He did, however, promise it would be real. And reality, to a soul that has spent decades anesthetized, stings like iodine on an open wound. And it is exactly at this point that Machiavelli enters the psychological scene, even having written centuries before Jung. For while Jung dove into the internal structure of the soul, Machiavelli mapped, with an almost surgical coldness, the external structure of human behavior. He was not the caricatured cynic that common sense invented. He was an implacable observer of patterns, and his most uncomfortable teaching is this: never judge a person by what they say. Judge them by what they repeatedly do, especially when they think no one is paying attention. Words are performance. Action is confession. And most people live deluded, because they insist on hearing the words of others as if they were contracts, when in truth they have never been anything more than packaging. There is a scene that repeats itself in almost everyone's life, but which only the observer registers in real time. Someone promises to be there for you at an important moment, but on the day, they fail to show up with an excuse that sounds reasonable. A few days later, the same person fails again in a different context, with another equally reasonable excuse. Months later, the third absence. Individually, each excuse is acceptable. Added together, they are a silent confession. That person does not prioritize you, they never will. And while most people keep asking for the next chance, the Machiavellian observer has already understood. He stops demanding presence. He adjusts the relationship. He repositions. He does not necessarily cut ties, but he never again deposits his emotional capital in a place where it has been proven to sink. The person who learns to read the world through this lens stops being surprised by betrayals. Not because they become paranoid, but because they stop denying signs. They notice, weeks in advance, that someone is pulling away by the microtone of their voice, by the delay in their responses, by the absence of curious questions about their life. They notice, months before a partnership falls apart, that a business partner is already making moves to prepare their exit. They notice in small actions when a relationship has lost its axis, even if both are still pretending to hold things together. This is not toxic distrust. It is strategic lucidity. And this is where Jung and Machiavel, even coming from seemingly opposite worlds, meet. Both understood that the truth about a human being is never in what they project. It is in the pattern they repeat when they believe they are safe. The mistake of the beginner observer is to use this clarity as an accusation. It is pointing a finger, trying to convince others of what they see, trying to prove someone's hidden intentions to those who prefer to remain blind. Jung would have said this is a childish attempt to force the collective consciousness to wake up. Machiavel would have said, with a melancholic smile, that this is politically disastrous. The person who sees too much needs to learn a rare discipline, to see in silence, to keep the reading to oneself, to adjust the strategy, to let each person reveal themselves in their own time, because human nature, when not interrupted, always confesses itself, and it is up to the observer to be attentive at the moment it confesses, without needing to denounce anything. The power of perception lies not in exposing, it lies in positioning. If you have reached this point, and something within your chest recognized these descriptions as if they were descriptions of your own life, hold on to this moment. It was for you that I prepared the Código do Despertar. It is not a course, it is not a miracle, it is not motivation. It is a daily path based on Jung to transform your perception into sovereignty. Access is in the first pinned comment, and if you put it off, you will continue knowing everything and living little. Choose today. Because this is what almost no one understands about the highly perceptive mind. It does not rest. While an ordinary person can leave an environment and mentally shut off, the observer takes the entire environment inside with them. They relive the conversation, revisit that colleague's facial expression, question the intention behind that seemingly innocent phrase, cross-reference data, compare behaviors, and reorganize the puzzle. It is not obsession, it is processing. Their brain was trained from a very early age to interpret the world in several simultaneous layers, probably because at some point in their personal history, understanding the subtext was literally a matter of emotional survival. Many relentless observers come from childhoods where they had to learn to read their parents' moods as one reads a weather forecast, where they had to decode heavy silences to know if they would be ignored or attacked, where they became experts at anticipating the emotional climate of a house before even opening the door. Jung would say that such a child developed out of necessity a sensitivity that most adults will never attain. But the price of this sensitivity, when not integrated in adulthood, is chronic vigilance. It is an inability to lower one's guard. It is the body permanently switched to a silent alert mode that no one around sees. And, even more painful, is the loneliness of feeling that everything you say needs to be explained 3 times, that your intuitions seem like exaggerations to those who do not see what you see, that your concerns, when you try to share them, sound paranoid to those who prefer the comfort of denial. You learn over time to filter what you say, to hide half of what you perceive, to swallow your internal warnings because you are tired of being called dramatic. And every swallowed warning becomes a stone inside your chest. Jung had a name for this: shadow. Not just the shadow of what is ugly within us, but the shadow of everything that had to be kept hidden so that social interaction could be possible. The swallowed anger, the censored perception, the hidden ambition, the ignored boundary. Things kept like that do not die. They leak, as inexplicable exhaustion, as impatience with those you love, as a grey sadness that appears on Sunday afternoons and you don't know where it comes from. There is also a physical symptom that almost no one associates with this condition, but which Jung intuited. The body of the relentless observer ages from within at a different rhythm. The hands may be at rest, but the chest remains tense. Sleep arrives, but in shallow layers. You wake up tired without having made any effort at all, because your nocturnal mind continued processing conversations, re-editing scenes, trying to fit that person's last strange remark into the larger pattern of their behavior. It is like living with a second brain working in silence, even while the first tries to rest. And over time, this silent exhaustion is interpreted by ordinary doctors as generalized anxiety, mild depression, burnout. Clinical names that describe the symptoms but never reach the root. The root is elsewhere. You are tired of carrying alone a level of awareness that no one around you sees exists. Jung's task was never to erase this shadow. It was to integrate it, to accept that it is a legitimate part of the soul, to bring into the light that which society taught you to hide and to restore to those contents the right to exist. The person who integrates the shadow ceases to be its hostage, ceases to be sabotaged by their own unconscious, ceases to act in ways contrary to what they desire, ceases to be exhausted by maintaining an impeccable image while dying inside. Integrating the shadow does not make you shadowy, it makes you whole. And a whole person is one who can finally walk without the weight of 2 identities, the public and the secret. Therein lies the next stage, and it is the most delicate, because a person who begins to see everything if they do not educate themselves emotionally runs a silent risk, transforming lucidity into superiority. They begin to look at others with a hint of disdain. They begin to categorize who is asleep and who is awake. They begin to feel intellectually above the masses. And here Jung would take a long, almost melancholic pause to remind us that this arrogance is just another mask, perhaps the most sophisticated of all. It is the ego taking refuge in perception, just as it once took refuge in approval. It is not evolution, it is displacement. You have traded the hunger for acceptance for the hunger to feel special, and the latter is quieter, but equally a prison. The mature path is different. It is realizing that most people are not being malicious. They are being human, at the level of consciousness they have managed to reach. They wear their masks because they were taught to believe that without them, they are unlovable. They lie to themselves because the truth would be too painful to carry without an internal structure. They wound without knowing it because they never learned how to deal with their own pain. This does not oblige you to endure everything. It does not force you to remain in relationships that drain you. But it does compel you toward a new choice, to see without judging, to withdraw without hating, to decide without becoming contaminated. Machiavel, whom so many accuse of being cold, offers a powerful clue here. He asserted, in essence, that understanding human nature does not mean despising it. It means ceasing to demand from it what it cannot deliver. If you expect loyalty from someone who has never shown loyalty to anything, you will suffer. If you expect transparency from someone who survives on masks, you will suffer. If you expect depth from someone who only learned to live on the surface, you will suffer. Pain does not come from human nature, it comes from our unrealistic expectations of it. The mature observer adjusts expectations. They do not cut off affections, they adjust expectations. And by doing so, they cease to be a victim of patterns that were already predictable. At this point, perception ceases to be a condemnation and becomes wisdom. You begin to relate to the world as one relates to the weather, understanding seasons, predicting rain, knowing when to take shelter and when to step out. You no longer personalize the winters of others. You are no longer hurt by the natural coldness of someone who never learned how to be warm. You no longer confuse immaturity with malice. And above all, you stop expecting others to take the internal journey that only you have chosen to embark upon. Each person walks at their own pace, and accepting this is one of the most compassionate acts an awakened soul can perform. Real compassion here is not accepting everything. It is understanding what each person can offer and ceasing to demand miracles from those who are still asleep. If every sentence so far seems to describe your internal life, stop, breathe, recognize what you are feeling. You are not a rare case. You are a delayed case, and delaying any further will not bring you any inner peace. The Código do Despertar exists precisely for you to cross this threshold without getting lost along the way. It is 60 days, one lesson per day, with questions, keys, and declarations inspired by the deep psychology of Carl Jung. It is not for you to learn about Jung. It is for you to apply Jung within yourself, in the exact place where pain resides. Access is in the first pinned comment of this video. If you close this tab now, tomorrow you will continue knowing too much and living too little. And the distance between what you know and how you live is the only real hell. The choice is yours, make it today. And we arrive at the point that changes everything. To what Jung would call, with his surgical serenity, inner sovereignty. And what Machiavel would describe as the true form of power. That which does not depend on an audience. The sovereign person is not the one who shouts the loudest, is not the one who dominates a room, is not the one who displays achievements. It is the one who has reached a silent state where the validation of others has lost its weight, where the opinion of another is merely information, not a verdict, where loneliness has ceased to be an absence and has become a presence of self. This person does not need to prove anything, does not need to convince anyone, does not need to perform balance, because they simply are. And here is the final inversion. The solitude you feared so much was not the problem. It was the portal. It was the inner space that needed to be emptied so that something greater could occupy it. Without this solitude, you would remain dependent on the gaze of others. Without this incomprehension, you would remain diluted in voices that were never yours. Without this painful lucidity, you would continue sleeping comfortably in a life that only seemed to be yours. Every loss on this journey was in truth a cleansing. Every person who drifted away opened up space for you to breathe more deeply. Every mask that fell revealed traits that were waiting to be recognized. You did not lose. You were returned to yourself. And this is where Jung would whisper the final truth. He who masters his own mind no longer needs to master anything else. Because those who have anchored themselves in their own center can no longer be displaced by opinions, by praise, by attacks, by rejections. The storm keeps raging outside, but it no longer moves you. And from this point on, your perception ceases to be a burden and becomes a compass. You use what you see to choose whom you associate with, what you accept, where you go. You no longer expose what you see. You position yourself based on what you see, and that changes absolutely everything, because an observer who positions himself in the right place is practically untouchable. Inner sovereignty in practice manifests itself in small definitive things. You stop needing to answer messages immediately to prove you care. You stop needing to justify your choices to people who would never make the same ones. You stop participating in arguments whose sole purpose was to test your patience. You stop accepting meetings, encounters, invitations, conversations that steal your energy without giving anything back. And no one understands where this new firmness came from. Some admire it in silence. Others start calling you arrogant, distant, changed. And you realize, with a new calm, that these accusations are just the language of those who have lost power over you. The sovereign does not explain himself. He watches the accusation arrive and keeps moving. The silence that once hurt now sustains. The absence of approval that once wounded now liberates. The distance from environments that no longer fit you ceases to be a source of guilt and becomes proof that you finally have a center. Being the lonely genius was never about being abandoned. It was about being the only one capable of seeing without needing the consensus of the group. And there is a rare dignity in inhabiting this place without trying to convince anyone of it. The sovereign does not recruit followers. He simply walks, and those who have eyes will see. Those who do not will move on. And both paths are legitimate. What remains of this journey is this. You can close this video now and go back to pretending you don't know what you know. You can go back to swallowing warnings. You can go back to explaining yourself to those who have already decided not to understand you. You can go back to folding yourself in the name of a peace that you alone were always sustaining. Or you can accept once and for all that lucidity has come to stay, and that the only way out is not to flee from it, but to walk with it as one walks with a flame lit inside the chest. There is no going back. There is only the next step. The illusion that protected you has just been exposed, and from now on, everything you do or fail to do will be, for the first time, a truly yours choice. Choose well.